Well, we've got breaking news this afternoon on a federal investigation that already cost the jobs of some top law enforcement officials. Operation Fast and Furious was a program through which the feds, trying to track down some high-ranking leaders in Mexican drug cartels, wound up allowing guns to fall into the hands of some very dangerous criminals down in Mexico. Today, there appears to be insult to injury as we learned that the Department of Justice also apparently released a dangerous explosives runner after the guy had already been arrested and was in custody. Why? Congressman Darrell Issa is a Republican from California. He chairs the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, which is looking into exactly that question. Sir, thank you so much for being here. Our viewers are definitely not going to be as steeped in this story as you are. So just in a nutshell, your concern is that what? DOJ had this dangerous guy handed to it by ATF. And DOJ let the guy go, and now you're trying to figure out why they did that?
Well, we now see that he will in fact be brought to justice, which is the good part of the story.
He's ultimately been apprehended, but there were months there where he wasn't.
Absolutely. And this is part of a pattern we saw in Fast and Furious and we saw in the Southwest, which was ATF wanted to grab the people at the first point in which they could get a legitimate prosecution and stop the guns, or in this case, grenades, from being trafficked. Unfortunately, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Department of Justice, wanted to wait and wait and wait. And unfortunately, they waited until precursors, basically bomb-making materials, had already crossed into Mexico, and the Mexicans had failed to intervene. That's not acceptable. It's what we need to make sure never happens again.
But is this a case of you trying to exercise 20/20 hindsight? Because as I understand it, the Justice Department is saying, yes, ATF arrested this guy, who was a very dangerous guy by all accounts. I mean, serious, up to his neck in grenades and manufacturing improvised explosive devices, 116 grenade hulls and parts and so on, supplying weapons to a cartel. Here he is. It's not a good guy. So they get him. They have him in custody. ATF, according to the reports, was horrified at the thought of releasing him and practically begged the senior prosecutor in DOJ for permission to arrest him, and they wanted him to stay in custody. And DOJ is now saying, we wanted to continue surveillance. We do this in some cases where you got the guy, but then you let him go so you can follow him, and maybe he brings you to somebody more important on the totem pole.
Look, I'm perfectly willing to have justice do their job, including sometimes letting somebody go that you follow, but you don't let guns walk, you don't let explosives walk. That's what's wrong with what went on in Fast and Furious, it's what's wrong in this whole grenade caper. You cannot allow these dangerous assets to fall into the wrong hands, and that's what ATF has been fighting for, is to say we stop the guns from walking, we stop explosives from being used because they're moved. That's an important first step. Yes, it's good to rack up the higher rankings, but you can't do it on the backs of dead Americans or Mexicans.
Now, this prosecutor, I think it's the same guy, Dennis Burke, he's the U.S. Attorney in Arizona. He's been ousted from his position. Does that put an end to it? I mean, is it, case solved, problem done?
Well, whenever you talk about human mistakes, you have to say what was in the system that allowed that human mistake to go on and perpetuate itself. And our committee is the Government Reform Committee. We're about making sure that there's a system to prevent this in the future. When we have assurances that that system is in place, then our job is done.
There's also questions that the DOJ is raising about ATF. They're not just trying to justify their own behavior by saying, hey, we wanted to continue surveillance. They're also saying it's the ATF that was to blame here because they conducted a sting where they tracked this guy, they gave him a bunch of these, let him get these grenade parts, he was going to take him across the U.S. border down to Mexico, and ATF was supposed to be trailing him, and according to DOJ, ATF lost the guy, and that's where all the trouble started. So it's like the two agencies of the federal government doing this to each other.
Megyn, this is one of those things where the facts matter. ATF wanted to arrest him before he crossed the border. DOJ wanted him to be able to cross the border. He was lost on the Mexican side of the border, which is outside of ATF's jurisdiction. He should never have been allowed to traffic across the United States border into Mexico. It just shouldn't have happened. That's what was wrong with the sting operation, is DOJ let explosives walk.
Wow, it's incredible when you get a behind-the-scenes view at what's going on, in particular on that southern border sometimes. Darrell Issa, sir, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Megyn.